Brody, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Awesome. So as we were just talking pre-show, talk a little bit about the adjustment. So for those who've heard, Brody's the new goalkeeper coach for Gotham FC in that NWSL. So, and he came all the way from Australia. So what's the adjustment been like from Australia to one of the greatest cities in the United States, New York, New Jersey, or greatest states, I should say.
Yeah, it's been a big one. Obviously, the going from one hemisphere to the other was pretty massive. The temperature was probably the biggest thing that shocked me when I got here.
That's right.
But the weather now, it's a bit overcast today, but
Yeah.
starting to wear shorts and shirts, which is like the first time in
Yeah.
4 or 5 months that I've been
Yeah.
able to wear that. And
Coming over in the middle of winter isn't the best time, huh?
yeah, first day I got here, I saw snow, and I haven't.
Right.
There's bugger all snow in Australia.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a bit of a shock that way, and obviously the time zone took me a while to get used to. There's like a 15-hour difference. But to be fair, when you've got good people around you, and you just got a job to focus on, you don't have any excuses really. You just get into it
Right.
and deal with it. I think the sleep probably was the longest
For sure.
thing. It took me a while to get into a good sleeping pattern. But
Right.
no, we're pretty much settled now.
You made it. Yeah, you're good.
It's good.
Yes. So what was that like coming over? Because you came over kind of again middle winter during preseason. So I mean, what was that adjustment like? Because you don't really essentially have an adjustment period. Like you were adjusting on the fly. So what were some of the challenges facing there?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got here. I had 3 days quarantine, and then next day into preseason. I wasn't able to start preseason with the group. I think I came in at week 4 or week 3. So yeah, basically I had to learn everyone, get straight into the job. There wasn't really an adjustment time. So yeah, just learning how to adapt to the new people, meeting everyone. So you're meeting like 35 different
Right.
people on one day. It's like, whoa, okay, hello. And I'm bad enough with names as it is, so
Yeah.
that took a little while to get to know people's names and put a name to a face. But other than that, getting into the flow with the coaches, the players, it wasn't too bad.
Right. Yeah. So before we dive into kind of what your time at Gotham, where'd you start coaching? And I know you were in the A League for a little bit, but where'd you start? How'd you get into it? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to. I mean, I realised pretty early on. I realised at about 19 that I wasn't going to be a player. I'm
Right.
fairly short, so in Australia, the back then the goalkeepers had to be well over 6 foot and had to be able to kick a mile.
Right.
And I was a bit different. And back
You were just ahead of your time. That's really what it was, right?
yeah, it's all a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
The minute I stepped onto my first coaching course, which was an outfield coaching course, everything clicked for me. Like I just felt like that was exactly where I needed to be. And so since that moment, I just did everything I could to try and give myself opportunities to coach. And here I am. So I'm very blessed to have the opportunity that I've got. But I started coaching with the Brisbane Raw youth team, so the boys team.
Okay.
And then since then, I was lucky enough to get volunteer as the A-League men's assistant for a little while. And that also opened doors to get into the women's program there. So for the best part of like 5 or 6 years, I was working across those 3 teams in Brisbane and doing 3 sessions a day every day.
Yeah.
So I was getting a lot of experience in a short amount of time. And I jumped on the coaching courses, as many coaching courses as I could early on. So in the first couple of years, I probably did 6 coaching courses, just to learn as much as I could about
Right.
how they were wanting to coach in Australia, and understand that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like I'm just a student of the game. I also am very passionate about human development and
Yeah.
the human being behind the athlete. And so if I could combine those two things, my love of football and loving the mind and the human being, then that was all I cared about. And so I just put myself in positions to be able to do that as much as I could.
What are some things you try to focus on when you talk about loving the mind, loving the human? What are some I guess things that when you're starting to build relationships, what do you try to do first?
I'm I can be a bit of a pain in the ass when it comes to
Yeah.
this because I love asking questions and I love
Right.
getting people to think about things maybe they haven't thought about before. Because I sort of believe that if you understand yourself to a deep level, then that's at the end of the day you've got you.
Right.
And so if you can understand what you are instead of get swayed into some of the things that you might think you are, but you don't truly know. Um, I think that if you ask yourself some tough questions or some like inquisitive questions, and you have an
Yeah.
objective like viewpoint on that, then you can really learn some interesting things. And then once you learn about yourself, you can figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are and where you want to grow and things
Mm.
like that. So yeah, I love asking people questions. I love
Yeah.
making people think about themselves. That's probably my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important though, right? Because you have to learn about them some way. So it's like, if you don't ask, you'll just never know, why this person does this, why they do that. And I think asking questions too also builds trust, right? Because eventually the more you do it, maybe they're having a bad day. And then maybe that day is the day they feel, okay, kind of a little bit open to share. It's like having a rough day, if my training's off, just, give me, cut me a little bit of slack, but, something like that. So I think that's important. I think it's always good to ask questions. And I feel the same way though. It's like, you don't want to pester them, right? But it's like you still gotta at least like know when to cut it off.
Mm. Yeah.
So you were a volunteer, so you volunteer with the first teams. There's a big discussion in a couple goalkeeper chats that I'm in that like how a lot of goalkeeper coach jobs in the States are volunteer, and these goalkeeper coach pundits are saying we shouldn't be volunteers anymore. But how important was that volunteer experience for you as a young coach in developing your coaching philosophy, etc.?
I wouldn't be here if I didn't do it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think that it gives you a number of opportunities to learn. Obviously, you want to get paid for what you do, but at the same time, it also humbles you. You gotta sort of figure out a way to put yourself in the window to get seen and to get observed, but at the same time, you
Right.
need to watch and learn. And I had a great mentor, Jason Kitt, and he was the first team goalkeeping coach. At
Jason Kidd, not the NBA basketball coach.
No,
Just so.
Jason Kitten.
Oh, Kid and Kid. I thought you said Kid. Okay.
Yeah, he played at Everton. Actually, he was one of the only Australians to have a FA Cup
Oh wow.
medal. Yeah, but he let me come in every day and work with the keepers and him, and his methodology was just about the game.
Yep.
We'd watch the game. We'd go, well, the old school way of training of just doing technical work and running through markers and things like that. Like that was where it was back then, but he sort of changed and was like, well, why are we doing this? It doesn't happen
Right.
in the game. And so being able to see him work at that level with some of the best keepers in the country in the men's game really opened my eyes, and it was from a young age. So that really inspired me to go and put that down with the youth team and work at it with the youth team. But yeah, going in every day and volunteering, knowing you should get paid and
Right.
all of that stuff. It is a battle, but you find a way. Like you go and get another job, you work late hours, you do whatever you can to put yourself in the position to be able to learn as much as possible, especially early on.
So how'd you get connected with the Gotham job? Was it just one you applied for, because when you talk about mentors and you have somebody like Jason Ken, who, forgive me, I've never heard of him, but it's like he's still, I'm sure, a well-known name and has played at a high level. So it's, the volunteer hours kind of connects you with the right people. It's like, so for me, again, just, so how'd you ended up getting connected with Gotham, and, how does that experience too with the mentorship and the volunteer hours play a role in it?
How I think, look, I didn't apply for the job.
Yeah.
I got a text message early in the morning from Scott at about 3:00.
Okay.
I sort of woke up and was like, what's this?
Yeah.
Someone was playing some sort of trick on me with, I didn't know what Gotham FC was.
Right.
I thought someone was like, yeah, Batman or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So I went back to bed.
Yeah, so you didn't get a Batmobile when you accepted the job.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got a text from Scott. I believe my resume was passed on to Scott. I was lucky enough to work with Nadine Angera, who's working over in Portland.
Yeah.
With the Portland Thorns. She came and played in Australia, in Brisbane, for a couple of seasons, and I was coaching with the women's then. And so building that relationship, working with her, I think that was the way that I was able to get a foot in the door here. She was kind enough to put my resume forward, and they must have been scraping the barrel, and here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the difference between football in Australia and here, would you say, if there is one?
Well, okay, so I can only talk about the women's game here. So, I mean, the women's game in Australia, especially recently, is more in a development phase. Like, it's a shorter season.
Right, that's right, yeah.
A lot of the best players from Australia are playing overseas. And so there's more, like the last 2 or 3 years have been more of an opportunity for the younger players in Australia to come up and develop. So the experience of the players is lesser at the moment in Australia. So it's more of a development league, excuse me. Whereas here, you've got some of the best players in the world.
Right.
They've played for 10, 15 years at the highest level. So that's probably the biggest difference outside of the physicality, the speed, the quality, the resources and support behind the players and the club.
Right.
That's probably the biggest thing. The difference though is like our A-leagues, the clubs are tied with the men's, whereas here, the clubs aren't tied with the men's.
Right. So
that's
interesting.
There's some of the differences, yeah.
Yeah. So so as you go from the A-league to here, when you got in, what were some of like your first, I guess, first steps that you wanted to take with the current goalkeeper group, and how you kind of want to implement your philosophy, your style? Because obviously, with your current group, you have the likes of Ashton Harris, who's been in World Cups. Hensley, who's a brand new, just was drafted. So you have all ends of the spectrum. So what was kind of your goal for the first couple of weeks to get started?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I did before signing was speak to them, all three of them. We had some good chats on the phone, and I'm massive about people owning their own development and understanding themselves, as I said before. So if I could get an idea of what they wanted to achieve for themselves personally, then I could figure out how to shape that into our sort of methodology. In coming here, because I came in late, they had a goalkeeping coach from the Red Bulls Academy look after them for the first couple of weeks, Dan, which, legendary for him for coming in and helping out. I suppose I had to come in and work out, where are they at right now after the 3 weeks, but then them learning about me and how I like to work in a physical sense, because they'd only heard me on the phone. And then also figuring out, we're this far away from our first game. What are some of the things we need to tick off? How are you feeling? We had other things to take into consideration, like where we were training. We were training indoors and on Astro, so there was only so much we could do. Otherwise, their bodies would have been slammed.
Right.
So it was an adjustment. I couldn't come in and do everything that I wanted. But at the same time, I was also learning about them. So I was asking a lot of questions. What do you like? What don't you like? What's worked for you in the past? I sent them probably way too many surveys, so I could help them more individually. Because the more that I understand about them, the more I can sort of shape what I do.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, it makes your life easier. I think for me, because I started at Pitt in the fall, and my training philosophy and style from the fall to the spring has just been completely different, because the fall is similar to you. I came in a couple of days before preseason, so I didn't really know who was on, besides like you said, a phone call. I didn't really know anything about them. So it's the fall was really a huge adjustment period for trying to figure out how to train them, and how they understand how I train. And the spring was completely different. So what I want to ask is, where's your training style and philosophy developed from the A-League to where you are now, or even your first couple years in the A-League to now?
Look, I was lucky to have Jason work with me back in Australia early on. My coaching style was how I was brought up, which was dive through cones, dive over markers.
Right.
Nothing in relation to the goal or the game. It was all technical. And like most people, they teach how they were taught. Whereas he was able to sort of put questions in me and say, why would you do this? And so essentially I just look at the game and from that you figure out you need to bring out the events that occur in the game as much as possible. and then my own personal study. Like I love studying how we learn and everything like that. And everything I do is based around creating an environment. Because if you create the environment right and you set the constraints and the rules or whatever it is, you do that well, thought out, then you almost don't need to stand and coach verbally. Like you just put them in there and they'll figure it out on their own. I suppose one of the things I did have to do was balance that with also getting high reps in, you know. You've got Ash and Mish, who are, you know, they've come from a different background. They've come from a fairly technical background for the majority of their career, so they like getting the reps in, they like getting the technical stuff in. So balancing that was probably something that I had to change. But I'm lucky enough to work with these guys 4 times a week. So throughout a week, you can sort of have a more technical focus, high reps focus, and then in other days you can have a more free flowing session where it's more discovery and decision making. And things like that. So it's always about having decision making in there, and I think positioning and movement patterns has always got to be in there. But how you deliver that is probably the biggest thing I've learned, and when I deliver it. Yeah.
Interesting. So how do you go about planning a session? Like, what do you think about? Are you thinking about the game, or are you thinking about a past session, past game? You know, what's your? It's probably going to depend too on the week, but you know, you match Saturday, let's say, you know, what's a week of training sessions look like for you in terms of your thought process in planning?
Very generally speaking, I mean, let's say we've got 4 sessions between games. So the first session back will generally look at trying to solve anything that's come from the weekend before, and I'll always try and incorporate some sort of passing and receiving. I'll always try and incorporate some sort of general handling with movements, and then I'll get into, like, you know, your match scenario. So that's how I would structure out the session. And then whatever match scenario that was, whether it's from the weekend before, you know, then we'd go and coach that. But then throughout the rest of the week, it would be, you know, you need to hit off a certain few things. You've got a match day -1 where, you know, it's just sharp. You're just sharpening. You've got reflexes. So I would look at, you know, how the next opponent is attacking us, where they get a lot of their finishes from. And that would be where I would design my reflexes session. You know, where are they crossing from? Where are the shots coming from? Short, sharp, no real crazy decision making or just habits and repetition. But then you've got your match day -2, which might be a bit more crosses, might be a bit bigger. You know, making sure you're getting the distribution in there as well. You know, where are they giving us space? Where are we trying to exploit with our feet? But also, where do they put in their crosses and their free kicks, things like that. And then I suppose a match day -3 or the middle of the week. I mean, it really depends on the team schedule as well. They've got like a strength day. There's only so much you can do. You know, you're almost just warming them up and getting them prepared to get smashed in the small sided games. But if we've got time, then of course we'll probably do a similar session to the first one, which is let's have a look at our opponents and have a look at how they create a lot of their chances. And we'll try and replicate that as close as we can to the match. And get our keepers exposed to, you know, visually, positionally, what they're going to face.
So how do you go about now? This is probably the tricky part, developing each goalkeeper, because again, like, you know, Ashland has different goals and different needs than Hensley, so it's like, you know, just 2 ends of the spectrum here. So, you know, what are some things that you do for them individually to help them kind of get where they need to go?
Well, we've got individual development plans, so IDPs for our keepers. But at the same time, I mean, the scenarios that we're teaching or focusing on, they're in every game. And so I suppose making sure that we're developing the understanding and that they're knowing what they're looking at or knowing what scenario they're in, so that they can associate that when they go and play. So Hensley, for example, is not playing that much. I spend a little bit more time communicating with her about what we're working on, because it's going to take her a little bit more to associate this training exercise with the game, because she hasn't played as many games. So I've got to use video and have a look at it. and explain what we're doing more. Whereas with Ash Ash if she's playing more, then she'll be able to go, that's right, I did this last weekend, or I felt this in the game. So it's a bit of a quicker association for her. So that's probably the biggest thing, is speaking to them and really getting that understanding of what we're doing, and then telling them why we're doing it is the biggest one. So that, if they know why they're doing it, they're going to buy in, and they're going to give more. And
how much you guys use analytics? Because you were mentioning about where teams typically cross and finish from. So how important has analytics become? Like, do they wear catapults or some type of GPS in training, and how to use that type of information to monitor player loads, and kind of does it play an effect in your session? Because I know we use them here. I see the player loads. It's like ours are always a lot lower than the field player, so it's like I haven't really figured out a way to kind of use them in this, or to adjust the sessions, because I don't know for goalkeepers how serious it really is. So I'm just curious to see how you guys use them.
Yeah, we do. They wear the catapults and the GPS. So I suppose the biggest thing is to make sure that they're not just doing a massive amount of dives every day.
Yeah.
And for example, like Philip, our strength and conditioning coach, he will tell us the goalkeepers worked really hard today. So just the week gone, a fairly solid first day back with the keepers. I had almost 50 minutes with them, and we were working on sort of your 1v1 breakaway. So it's a longer distance to travel back to get into the goal, or you might be blocking or spreading, where that takes its toll on the body.
Yeah.
So knowing that you don't want to just be going and smashing them too high. You sort of got to have a high day, and then you might just bring it right back down the next day, so that they're not just going to be super fatigued.
Right.
But then the other analytics in terms of the stats and stuff like that, we use them all the time in our scouting, just to get an idea of trends and what opponents doing, and what do the stats say, basically, because then you can have a look at the game, you can have a look at the stats, and you can sort of marry the two up. And then from there you pick out what your priorities are. Yeah.
So what are some daily habits, going off that you've noticed from Ashton or Michelle, even Hensley for that matter, that makes them excel at that level?
They're all pros. They're very good pros. Hensley's attitude and mindset, in fact all of their attitudes and mindset, is the thing that probably sets them apart. They're just winners, and they just want the best, and they want to be the best, and they get frustrated themselves when they're not. And so even that's something I've got to manage, because it's don't let that waste or drain your energy, when you could just move on and focus on the next thing. But it's good because they care. So it's probably their attitude. Every single day they're looking to improve on something. Every single day they're open to learn. They're doing everything in the gym, in activation. They do everything to get their bodies right to jump into the session from the beginning. They don't skip any corners, that's for sure. Yeah.
So last question that I'm very curious about too, in just terms of development as a coach, is where do you feel you've grown the most from day one as a professional coach to now? Where have you seen yourself grow the most?
It's probably got to be putting the ego aside. I think that you see a lot of coaches, especially in the past where I've grown up from, it was the coach was the one who was telling you what to do, and they knew what to do, and they were the source of the knowledge. I think now it's putting that aside and going, we're all learning, we're all growing. How can we all learn and grow together and achieve our goals together, especially as a goalkeeping department? I think that's probably the biggest thing. But then, because from that you realise, well, I can help you, you can help me, we can all help each other. And not putting your, everything into it. I think that's probably the biggest thing, because you don't, no one does,
Right.
We can always keep learning. And so that's where the power of the questions come in. If you ask good questions to yourself and to the people you're working with, I think you can sort of, your potential is, you can fulfill it that way.
Right.
You've got an endless opportunity. Yeah.
Well, hey man, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on, taking the time, and good luck with the rest of the season.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Talk to you again.
All right. Great.
Thanks, mate.